I found my little sister's diary. I wish I hadn't. My little sister, Emily, always loved keeping a diary. She had stacks of them, pastel covers with little locks, each one filled with messy handwriting and stickers. She used to guard them fiercely, threatening to tell on me if I so much as looked at them. But Emily passed away 3 months ago. She was only 11, a freak accident at the lake. She fell in, hit her head on a rock, and drowned before anyone could get to her. The funeral was unbearable, and afterward I couldn't bring myself to touch her things. Her room remained untouched, like a shrine to the girl she used to be. But last week, Mom asked me to start sorting through her belongings. I found her latest diary in the bottom drawer of her desk. It was unlocked. I thought reading it might bring me some closure. I thought it would help me feel close to her again. I was wrong. The first few entries were normal. Today we had pizza for dinner. I took 2 slices before Joey could get them all. He got mad, but I don't care. That made me smile. Emily always loved teasing me. The next few pages were full of harmless ramblings, complaints about school, doodles of flowers and stars, lists of her favorite songs. But then, about halfway through, the tone started to change. I saw the man again today. He was standing in the backyard, watching me through the window. I told Mom, but she said I was imagining things. He's always there, though. I can feel him. The man. I paused, flipping back through the earlier entries. No mention of him before. Maybe it was just Emily's overactive imagination. She'd always been a little jumpy, a little too eager to believe in monsters under the bed. I kept reading. The man came closer last night. He tapped on my window. He didn't say anything, just smiled at me. His teeth are so big. I wanted to scream, but I was too scared. I felt a chill run down my spine. Emily's handwriting got messier with each entry, her words more frantic. He comes inside now. He stands at the foot of my bed while I pretend to sleep. He whispers my name. He says he's waiting. Waiting for what? I flipped to the last few pages, my heart pounding. Joey doesn't see him. No one does. He told me not to tell. He said they wouldn't believe me. He said I belonged to him now. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking. This had to be some kind of prank, a made-up story Emily wrote to scare me. But the way she described it, the fear in her words, it felt real. Too real. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the diary. I couldn't shake the image of Emily, lying in bed, too terrified to scream, while some stranger stood over her. I barely slept. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed about her. She was standing at the edge of the lake, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, and there was mud on my shoes. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd gone outside to clear my head and didn't remember. But the next day, I found a page from Emily's diary lying on my desk. I hadn't brought the diary upstairs. The page wasn't one I'd read before. He says Joey will come next. He says Joey will join me soon. My blood turned to ice. That night, I locked my bedroom door. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that grief was playing tricks on me. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I heard it. A tap. 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 On my window. I didn't want to look. I couldn't. But something made me turn my head. He was me, there. A man, tall and thin, his face pale and stretched like wax. He smiled at me, bearing rows of jagged teeth, and pressed a single finger to his lips. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. When I woke up, it was morning. The window was locked, no sign of anyone outside. I almost convinced myself it was a dream, until I went downstairs and found another page from Emily's diary on the kitchen table. He says it's time. He says Joey belongs to him now. I haven't slept since. I haven't left the house. I keep hearing taps at the windows, whispers in the dark. Last night I found muddy footprints leading from the lake to my bedroom door. I think I understand now. Emily didn't fall. She didn't hit her head. He took her. And now he's coming for me. My roommate has been in the shower for more than 4 hours, so I got home at around 11 p.m. Late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. About 4 drinks deep at this point, and I'm tired, just about ready to fall asleep as I stumble through the doorway. I lay down on the couch and reach for my bag of joints and spark one up as I pull YouTube on my laptop. I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close passing out, when I hear the front door open. I sit up and turn my head slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything and walks slowly to his room, which is normal enough. I'd been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. The guy really doesn't talk unless spoken to, which was far from a problem for me. He also generally kept things clean on his end, never causing much in the way of problems. I really couldn't complain. So I go back to watching YouTube, and about 5 minutes later, I hear the shower in his room turning on. Once again, nothing strange. At this point, I'm watching bare-knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open, maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out. I remembering waking up in darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable. Once it did, I grabbed my phone, checked the time. Around 3:30 a.m. from what I remember. I was starving, and so I got up, began walking towards the fridge, and then I noticed it. A soft but ever-present noise in the background. It took me a few seconds to really recognize what it was. The shower. Suddenly, the events of last night began replaying in my head. Drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch, my roommate coming home, the shower turning on. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he went to bed and forgot to turn it off? I shook my head. There's no way that happened, I thought. Maybe he slipped and fell. Realizing the implications of this, I rushed towards his room but found his bathroom door locked. I began pounding on it. "Hey man, you all right?" No response. I considered kicking the door down but decided to call 911 before I did that. I took my phone out, preparing to dial when I noticed that I had an unread text, one from my roommate. "Hey man, I couldn't sleep, so I went over to my girlfriend's place. Not sure when I'll be back." Sent 2 hours ago. I look at the bathroom door, then back down at my phone. Everything about this was wrong. First of all, my roommate barely texts me, and certainly never to tell me that he's going out. Second of all, I know for a fact that he's single, and has been for a while. And third of all, who the fuck was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. Sent him some texts, but no response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet were still beside his laptop. My head's starting to spin at this point, and I get out of there, go back into the living room and turn on the lights. I'm pacing around in a circle, trying to follow the plot while also trying to ignore the shower, a noise that I never could have imagined being so dreadful in any context. Sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move towards it and see that it's a phone. My roommate's phone. The panic begins setting in, and immediately I grab my keys and run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall and take the stairs down to the lobby, but even that doesn't seem far enough away, and so I make my way over to the McDonald's across the street. I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason feeling too nervous to do so. But even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out onto the empty streets. Almost immediately, I get this feeling that I'm being watched, and I feel my gaze drifting up and towards the apartment. Soon I'm looking at my balcony and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin. But it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what it was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know, its head nearly scraping the bottom of the balcony above. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any of its details. The darkness and distance may have been enough to explain that away. But there was something about it that drove me towards a different conclusion, that this thing simply possessed no details that could have been observed, that the only element of its composition was that of unadulterated darkness. Of course, my gut instinct was to get the hell away from it. But the voice in my head was telling me that if I were to try and run, this thing would end up following me. I went back into the McDonald's instead, locking myself in the bathroom as I finally dialed 911. I told the operator that somebody had broken into my place, but that I had gotten out of there without them noticing, but that they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation without making me come across as batshit. The operator told me that they'd be sending somebody over for me to hang tight. I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit until I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cops, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have an idea who it might be? What are their intentions? I told them I didn't know, that I couldn't figure it out, but they just kept on asking. Soon I was practically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking this seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched on as they entered the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what they were going to tell me when they came down. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by a single, muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait there, unsure of what to do otherwise. 20 more minutes of silence, and the officers still hadn't come down. Soon I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me, and the scene had fallen into chaos, officers shouting over each other and into their radios, more questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remember the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers became more and more frantic. I remembered hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There were a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into one of the interrogation rooms where I found 2 nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves and immediately went into a series of questions, each one more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of his job? How many different people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? Voices that did not belong to your roommate? Have you ever seen a circle of people standing outside of the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall? And one of the most unsettling ones. Have you ever seen somebody standing at the foot of your bed upon waking up between the hours of midnight to 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued probing me, my mind began conjuring up some of the strange shit that had happened after my roommate had moved in. Shit that I had written off as figments of my imagination, simply because I had no other explanation for them. I did hear the voices, always coming from the room next to mine where my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember it either sounding like a young woman or a man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out any words. It always sounded like gibberish. And then there was that one time where I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Still half asleep, I didn't bother turning the lights on as I entered. But as my eyes began adjusting to the dark, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet, somebody extremely tall. Of course, when I turned on the lights, nothing was there. It was easy to chalk it up as a product of late-night drowsiness at the time, and I'd never really thought about it since. After doing my best to give them useful information, the suits spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phones. Once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me that they'd be in touch before leaving the room. A cop came in a few minutes later and told me that since I couldn't return to the apartment, they would set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they gave me a call. "What happened?" I asked him. "What did you guys find up there?" He stared at me for a long time, not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he held deep aversion for what he was considering telling me. Eventually, he just shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "I mean, I really don't know." I nodded, tried to smile, though I'm sure it didn't come across very well. "It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course I couldn't sleep, couldn't really eat. The officer hasn't called me yet. When I try searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I can find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. Update. I fell asleep and I just woke up. It's 1 a.m. now, and I can hear the shower." There are only 5 of us on this camping trip, but we keep counting 6. Bright flashes of red streaked across the sky. It was like someone was waving a flare light from space, faint but unmistakable. We cracked UFO jokes, laughing as we hammered our tents into the ground. I knew without a doubt there were 5 of us. We'd all been friends since middle school, and this camping trip was how we'd celebrate our high school graduation. At some point, the flashes stopped without warning, leaving us chatting casually while finishing up the tents. Dave was the first to set his tent up. "I'm gonna grab some firewood," he announced, dusting his hands off. I remember working the night shift with him last year at the gas station. Those long hours at a dead-end job had been way more fun with him around. Eric was still fumbling with his tent, muttering to himself and fiddling with the manual. I wasn't as close to him as the others, but we'd shared a math class once. I'd copied his homework a few times, not my proudest moments, but I remember them well enough. Nearby, Ava and Sally, my cousin, teamed up on their tent, giggling as they worked. I knew them both as well as anyone could. Ava's younger brother had always begged to tag along with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I need to be clear. There were only 5 of us, and I knew everyone. Dave wandered off to find firewood, while the rest of us pulled out foldable chairs and arranged them around the fire pit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest grew darker, shadows stretching across the ground like long, crooked fingers. A chilly breeze stirred the air. Eric rummaged through his bag for a flashlight, and we wondered aloud what was taking Dave so long. The rustling of leaves announced his return, and he stepped into the clearing with a pile of branches under his arm. "You guys didn't even pull out a chair for me," Dave grumbled as he dumped the wood into the pit. That's when it hit me. 5 chairs were already taken. I tried to make sense of it, but my thoughts felt muddy, as if something was wrapping its fingers around my brain and squeezing. Up until that moment, I'd felt sharp, alert. But now, every time I tried to figure out why the chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my mind seemed to short-circuit. An unease crept into me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The forest had gone completely silent. The others noticed it too. Eric fidgeted nervously, adjusting his glasses and scanning the group, his fingers twitching in frustration. I glanced at every face, each one tense, familiar, yet somehow wrong until... "It's fine. I'll grab my own chair," Dave muttered, breaking the awkward silence. I stood to help him. He gave me a look, one that said he felt it too. We moved toward the tents, and as we walked, I whispered, "How many people are here?" Dave hesitated, glancing at the fire pit. "There's 5, right? I mean, we packed 5 chairs." His voice wavered. "That's what I thought. Maybe someone just forgot theirs." I knew that wasn't right. We wouldn't have brought extra chairs. They were bulky, and everyone had brought their own. Still, the more I tried to focus on the problem, the more my head throbbed, like I was forcing thoughts through wet cement. When we returned to the fire, 2 chairs were empty, one for Dave and one for me. Everything seemed to add up, except it didn't. Sally suggested we were just exhausted from the long hike, and Ava broke out the drinks. We each grabbed a can, and in no time, the whole 6-pack was empty. We huddled closer to the fire for warmth, reminiscing about old times. Ava was midway through a story about strange things happening at her house when the uneasy feeling washed over me again. Something was off, something important. "Who started the fire?" I blurted, cutting Ava off mid-sentence. Everyone looked annoyed until they realized none of us had. I scanned their faces, barely illuminated by the flickering flames. Fear twisted their features into expressions I didn't recognize. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked, his voice thin. Dave shook his head slowly. "I think," Sally began, staring just past me. "I think the person behind Jenny started it." My heart pounded as I whipped around, but there was nothing, only the pitch-black forest pressing in on us. Staring into that darkness made me feel small, as if I'd been swallowed whole by the trees. Sally trembled violently, her breath hitching. Ava rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders to calm her. "We should leave," Ava whispered, her voice unsteady. "We'll get lost in the dark," Eric warned. "It's better to stay the night and leave at first light." Reluctantly, we agreed. But we made a new plan. No one would sleep alone. We'd pair up, squeezing into the small one-person tents. As we arranged ourselves, something became clear. There were only 5 of us, and yet we kept thinking there were 6. Eric, drenched in sweat, muttered under his breath, "Why do we keep thinking there are 6? I tried to do a head count. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and... My voice faltered. I counted again, pointing at each person. When I reached Sally, a wave of nausea slammed into me. My vision blurred and my head throbbed with stabbing pain. I doubled over, vomiting into the dirt. Dave steadied me. "We'll figure this out in the morning," he whispered. Later, Dave helped me into our tent. Outside, the others arranged the tents in a U-shape so the openings would all face inward. It felt safer that way. Despite the tension, sleep came quickly until Ava's scream tore through the night. Dave and I scrambled out of our tent to find Ava and Sally standing outside Eric's tent, pale and shaking. I pushed past them and unzipped the door. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up, with him inside it. His head, twisted in agony, rested at the center of the bundle, while the rest of his body coiled around it, dark blood seeping through the fabric. Dave zipped the tent shut before anyone could look for too long. "Run," he whispered. We bolted into the forest, huddling close as Dave's flashlight cut through the suffocating darkness. Ava stumbled and twisted her ankle. Someone offered to help, but instead, they dragged her into the woods. Her screams echoed through the trees, sharp and desperate. Sally tore free from Dave's grip and sprinted after her. I tried to follow, but Dave grabbed my shoulders. "We need to go, Jenny. Please." Sally's voice was abruptly cut off, and the forest swallowed her whole. Dave and I ran, hearts pounding, lungs burning. At some point, there were 3 of us. Someone was running just behind us. "Dave? Who's behind us?" I gasped. Dave glanced at me, confusion and terror flickering across his face before solidifying into rage. "Keep running!" he yelled, shoving his car keys into my hand. Then he turned and launched himself at whoever was following us. I ran, tripping and stumbling through the darkness until the forest spit me out into the parking lot. Without looking back, I jumped into the car, started the engine and sped onto the highway. Now I'm at a rest stop, waiting for the cops to arrive. I don't think they believe me, but they're sending someone anyway. The sun's starting to rise. Before they get here, I need to check why the person in my back seat has been so quiet.